The little music box sat on the topmost shelf of the bookcase, a dark wooden rectangle covered in a fine layer of dust. The silence it held was an ancient one, the kind that belongs to forgotten things. Outside, the rain was falling steadily, a soft, continuous sound that filled the house. The drops tapped against the window panes, each one tracing a brief, winding path before joining the others that trickled down to the sill. Inside the room, the only light came from a floor lamp, which cast a warm, golden circle over a fabric armchair and a small rug. The box was outside this circle of light, almost in the half-light, an object no longer fulfilling its purpose. Maybe this is just another one of those quiet stories made to help you relax. And sometimes that's all we really need. It hadn't played in a very long time. Its small winding key on its underside was still. The lid, with a delicate inlay of a flower, was slightly misaligned, as if it had been closed in a hurry, or perhaps carelessly, the last time. It was a small imbalance, nearly invisible to anyone unfamiliar with the object, but to the one sitting there in that silent room, the box's stillness was noticeable. It was a promise of a melody left unfulfilled. A gaze lingered on it for a moment. The rain continued its rhythm outside, an accompaniment to the silence within. And then the decision arose, simple and clear, without any weight or urgency. It was just a quiet realization. Tonight, it would play again. Rising from the armchair was a slow movement. The air in the room was cool, with the faint scent of old books and the damp earth from outside. Bare feet felt the soft touch of the rug, and then the gentle cool of the wooden floor. To reach the shelf, a small wooden stool was needed, which creaked softly under the body's weight. With both hands, the box was lifted from its place. It was lighter than it looked, and the dust left a soft smudge on the fingers. There was a sense of fragility about it, a warning to handle it with care. The box was carried to the coffee table, into the circle of lamplight. Now, under the direct illumination, the details became clearer. The dust was gray and fine. There were small scratches in the wood, marks from years of use and of being forgotten. The misaligned lid created a thin line, a dark line that broke the flower's design. The promise of restoring its function, of hearing its music again, brought a sense of quiet purpose to the evening. It wasn't a large or important task, but it was something tangible, something that would begin in disarray and end in harmony. The first step would be to prepare the workspace. In the kitchen, under the dim light over the counter, a few items were gathered: a soft, clean cotton cloth, and another slightly damp one, a small bowl of warm water, cotton swabs, and a brush with very soft bristles, the kind used for watercolor painting. Everything was placed on a wooden tray and carried back to the living room. The sound of the rain seemed a little stronger now, tapping against the roof in a relaxing cadence. The house was quiet, asleep, and this small project seemed to belong entirely to that moment, to that night. The task wasn't just to fix the box, but to care for it, to return it to a state of balance where the wood was clean, the lid closed properly, and most importantly, the melody could finally be set free. With the music box in the center of the table under the yellowed light, the work began. The first stage was the exterior cleaning. The dry cloth was passed gently over the lid and sides, gathering the loosest layer of dust. The movement was slow, following the grain of the wood. The dust collected on the fabric, revealing a dull, lifeless varnish underneath. The floral inlay, once opaque, began to show a hint of its original colors, an ivory tone for the petals and a pale green for the leaf. The sound of the cloth gliding over the surface was almost inaudible, a whisper that blended with the distant sound of the rain. After the dry cloth came the soft bristled brush. It was used to clean the corners and crevices where the dust was more stubborn. The flexible bristles traced the edges of the lid and the base of the box, dislodging tiny particles of grime that the cloth couldn't reach. Special care was taken around the small brass hinges on the back. They were tarnished and dark, but the brush revealed a golden gleam beneath the oxidation. Every movement was deliberate. There was no rush, the night was long, and the rain outside marked its own time, slow and patient. Next, the cotton cloth was lightly dampened in the bowl of warm water. It was wrung out until almost no water remained, leaving just a cool dampness to the touch. With it, the surface of the box was cleaned once more. The moisture revived the wood, darkening it slightly and causing the scent of old dust to give way to a soft aroma of damp wood. The box already looked different. It looked awake, as if the attention and care were bringing it back from a long slumber. The water in the bowl, once clear, grew cloudy, a visible sign of progress. While the wood air-dried naturally, attention turned to the metal details, the two hinges and the small clasp on the front of the box. With a cotton swab, the brass surfaces were carefully rubbed. The accumulated grime came away, revealing an aged metal that still held a warm sheen. The clasp, which had seemed a dark gray, now showed its old gold color. It was a meticulous work, demanding focus. The eyes concentrated on the small point of contact between the cotton and the metal, while the rest of the room dissolved into a soft focus background. The sound of the rain on the window was a constant calming presence, a reminder that the world outside was following its course, while in here a small universe was being restored. After being cleaned, the box was left on a dry cloth so that any trace of moisture could completely evaporate. It was a moment of pause, of observation. The wood already had a different appearance. The grain was more defined, and the lamplight reflected more softly on its surface. The flower on the lid seemed sharper. The box was still silent, and the lid was still crooked, but the first visible step of its transformation was complete. The grime of time had been washed away. The object was now prepared for the next stage of its care, the repair of what was broken inside. The simple act of cleaning had already brought a new dignity to the object, a sense that it was being seen and valued once again. The surface of the box was now completely dry to the touch. The next step was to investigate the interior, to discover the reason of the silence and the misaligned lid. For that, the box had to be opened. The lid did not yield easily. It was stuck, perhaps from a jammed hinge or from the wood itself having warped over time. Forcing it was not an option. A way to open it gently had to be found. A thin wooden spatula, the kind used for sculpting clay, was brought from another room. Its tip was flat and smooth, perfect for inserting into the gap without scratching the wood. With extreme care, the tip of the spatula was fitted into the small opening at the front of the box. A very light pressure was applied, moving the tool from side to side. There was a small pop, a dry, low sound, and the lid moved a millimeter. It was a sign that this was the right path. Repeating the movement with patience, the lid gradually loosened until finally it opened completely,
with a soft groan from the hinges. The inside of the music box was revealed for the first time in many years.
A scent of dust and old metal rose from the open compartment. The inner lining was red velvet, now faded and worn in places. There was a small empty space where perhaps jewelry or other small keepsakes had once been kept. And protected beneath a small glass plate was the heart of the box, the musical mechanism. The brass cylinder with its tiny protruding pins was motionless. Beside it, the steel comb with its teeth of varying lengths waited to be plucked. The glass protecting it was dusty on the inside, which made the view of the mechanism a bit hazy. The first problem to solve was the lid. One of the small brass hinges was slightly bent, causing the lid to not align properly when closed. With a pair of needle-nose pliers, the hinge was held firmly. A gentle, controlled pressure was applied in the opposite direction of the bend. The metal yielded without resistance. A test was performed, closing and opening the lid a few times. The groaning sound diminished, and it now fit perfectly onto the base, the flower's design once again whole and aligned. The first visible imbalance was corrected. Now attention turned to the mechanism. The small glass plate was held in place by two minuscule screws. With a watchmaker's screwdriver, they were slowly turned. The screws were so small they were placed inside a small bottle cap so they wouldn't get lost. The glass was lifted with the fingertips and set aside on the soft cloth. Without its protection, the mechanism was exposed. Dust had settled between the teeth of the comb and around the cylinder. Using the same soft bristled brush as before, the dust was swept away with light brushes, blowing gently to remove the finest particles. Upon examining the mechanism more closely, the cause of the silence became clear. One of the teeth on the steel comb, one of the longest ones responsible for the lowest notes, was bent slightly downward. It wasn't broken, just out of position. This small imperfection prevented the cylinder from turning freely. When trying to move the cylinder with a finger, it would catch at that exact spot. The source of the problem had been found. It was not a serious defect, but something that would require a steady hand and a precise touch to correct. The rain outside had softened to a light drizzle, and the house seemed even quieter, creating the perfect atmosphere for the concentration the task demanded. The next stage was the most delicate of all, to correct the bent tooth of the steel comb. Any sudden movement could break it, which would make the repair much more complex. The music box was positioned so the lamplight fell directly on the mechanism, illuminating every detail of the cylinder and the comb. The needle nose pliers, the same ones used on the hinge, were wiped with a cloth to ensure no dirt would scratch the metal. The breath grew calmer, slower. All focus was on that tiny point of steel.
The tip of the pliers was carefully positioned at the base of the bent tooth, where it joined the main body of the comb. The idea was not to bend it back from the tip, but to correct the curve from its origin. The hand holding the pliers was steady, braced against the edge of the box for stability. The other hand held the base of the box, keeping it motionless on the table. The metal of the pliers touched the steel of the tooth with a cold, solid contact. For an instant, nothing moved. It was a moment of assessment, of feeling the material's resistance. Then, a minimal, almost imperceptible pressure was applied. The steel offered a slight resistance and then gave way a little. The movement was stopped. The tooth had moved, but it still wasn't perfectly aligned with the others. It needed one more adjustment. The pliers were repositioned slightly higher, and another pressure, equally gentle and controlled, was exerted. This time, there was a tiny sound, an almost inaudible metallic click, as the tooth settled back into its original position, perfectly parallel to its neighbors. A visual inspection confirmed it. The line of teeth was now uniform and continuous. With the main obstacle removed, it was time to tend to the rest of the mechanism. Even though it wasn't broken, years of inactivity could have dried out any original lubrication. In a small desk drawer, there was a vial of fine, clear machine oil used for precision mechanisms. A single drop of oil was placed on a ceramic surface. The tip of a pin was dipped into the drop, collecting a minuscule amount of lubricant, almost invisible to the naked eye. This pinprick of oil was then touched to the mechanism's pivot points, on the cylinder's axle, on the small gears that connected the cylinder to the winding spring. With each touch, the oil spread, a thin, transparent film that would reduce friction. After lubricating the key points, the cylinder was gently turned with a finger. This time, it moved without any impediment. The movement was smooth, silent, and fluid. The small pins of the cylinder passed under the teeth of the comb without touching them, as the trigger that started the music was not yet released. The heart of the music box was mechanically alive again. The sound of the rain had almost completely ceased. Only the occasional drip from an eave broke the silence outside. The delicate work was done. The pliers and oil were put away. The mechanism, now clean, aligned, and lubricated, gleamed under the light. It was a small machine of sound, a promise of melody contained in brass and steel. The feeling was one of productive stillness, of a problem solved not by force, but by patience and a careful touch. The box was ready to be reassembled, to become a cohesive and functional whole once more.
With the internal mechanism repaired, attention returned to the box's external beauty. The initial cleaning had revealed the wood, but it still looked dry and dull. It was time to nourish and protect it. On the table next to the box, a small pot of beeswax and a clean, dry cotton cloth were placed. The pot was opened, releasing a sweet, natural scent that mingled with the air in the room. The wax was solid and yellowish, with a soft texture to the touch. With the fingertips, a small amount of wax was taken from the pot and applied to the lid of the box. Using the cotton cloth, the wax was spread in slow, circular motions. The wood drank in the wax, and its color immediately deepened, taking on a richer, warmer tone. The grain, once pale, now stood out with more definition. The floral inlay seemed to come to life, the ivory of the petals becoming creamier, and the green of the leaf more vibrant. The work continued over all the external surfaces of the box, the sides, the front, the back. Every inch of wood was covered with a thin, even layer of wax. The process was meditative. The sound of the cloth rubbing the wood was rhythmic and soft. The scent of beeswax filled the space around the table. The lamplight reflected on the waxed surface, which began to acquire a satin sheen, a subtle luster that spoke of care, not newness. It was as if the wood's own sap were being restored. After the entire box was waxed, it was set aside for a few minutes so the wood could completely absorb the treatment. During this interval, the small glass plate that covered the mechanism was cleaned. With a soft cloth and a bit of glass cleaner, both sides were polished until not a single smudge or speck of dust remained. The glass became perfectly transparent, like a clear window into the little music machine. The tools used so far were organized and put away. The bowl of water was emptied,
and the damp cloth was laid out to dry. The workspace was gradually being tidied, keeping pace with the reassembly of the box. After a few minutes, another clean cloth, this one of flannel, was used to polish the box. The movements were now quicker, yet still gentle, buffing the wax that had dried on the surface. The satin sheen intensified, becoming deeper and more uniform. The wood felt smooth and pleasant to the touch, with a sense of warmth and solidity. The box didn't look new, nor was that the intention. It looked well cared for, a piece that had been valued and preserved. The small marks and scratches of time were still there, but now they seemed part of its history, not signs of neglect.
Finally, it was time to close up the box. The glass plate, now crystal clear, was carefully placed back over the mechanism. The two minuscule screws were retrieved from the bottle cap and returned to their places. With the precision screwdriver, they were tightened just enough to secure the glass, without excessive force. The mechanism was once again protected, but now visible in all its gleaming detail. The box was almost whole. Only one last final touch was needed to complete the restoration of its interior. It felt as if the scattered pieces of a puzzle were coming together, forming a cohesive and satisfying picture. The last step before testing the music was to restore the comfort of the box's interior. The old red velvet lining was worn and faded. Though clean, it didn't suit the newly cared-for exterior. The decision was made to replace it, giving the inside an appearance as refreshed as the outside. In a box of craft supplies, there was a small scrap of wove felt in a shade of deep green, almost the color of moss. The color was sober and elegant, and would pair well with the dark wood and brass of the mechanism. The old red velvet lining was carefully removed. It was only glued at the edges and came away easily, revealing the bare wood at the bottom of the box. The scrap of green felt was placed on the bottom to measure the required size. With a light-colored pencil, the cutting lines were marked on the back of the felt. A pair of sharp scissors, the kind used for fabric, was used to cut the material. The cut was made slowly, following the lines with precision, so the new lining would fit perfectly into the space. The sound of the scissors snipping through the felt was low and muffled. A craft glue, suitable for wood and fabric, was applied in strategic spots on the bottom of the box, just a few thin drops so not to soak the felt. With the fingertips, the felt cutout was positioned over the glue. It was pressed down gently, starting from the center and moving towards the edges to ensure there were no air bubbles. The felt settled perfectly on the bottom, its edges touching the inner walls of the box. The deep green color created a beautiful contrast with the wood, giving the interior a sense of depth and softness. It was a new, clean bed for the music that would soon play. The box was left open for a while so the glue could dry completely. Meanwhile, the small winding key on the base of the box was cleaned with a cloth. It was a butterfly-shaped brass key, and it too was tarnished. After being polished, its golden shine returned, matching the hinges and the clasp. Everything was now in harmony. The polished exterior, the renewed interior, the clean and repaired mechanism. Every part of the box had received attention. When the glue was dry, the box was finally ready. The restoration was complete. The only thing left was to wind it up and listen. Holding the box firmly, the butterfly key was turned. The internal spring offered a soft, growing resistance, a sign that it was storing the necessary energy. The sound of the internal ratchet was a rhythmic, satisfying click. It was wound all the way, careful not to strain the mechanism.
An expectant silence settled over the room. The rain had completely stopped, and now the night outside was quiet. The music box, now fully wound, was placed back in the center of the table. The lid was closed. The brass clasp clicked into place, soft and precise. From the outside, it was the same box as before, but transformed. The dust was gone, the shine had returned, the lid was aligned. Inside, the mechanism waited, ready. The promise made at the start of the evening was a breath away from being fulfilled. There was nothing left to do but the final gesture, to open the lid and let the melody fill the silence. The journey of repair had reached its destination. The moment of contemplation was about to begin. The moment had arrived. The room was in complete silence. The only light was still from the lamp, creating an island of calm in the soft darkness of the night. The music box rested on the table, its dark wood reflecting the light with a warm glow. Hands moved slowly towards it. Fingers touched the small brass clasp. For an instant, they remained there, feeling the coolness of the metal. Then, with a gentle motion, the clasp was undone. The lid was lifted. The very moment it opened far enough to release the internal trigger, the music began. The first notes sounded, clear and crisp in the silent room. They were metallic yet sweet, with a purity that only old mechanical things possess. The melody was simple, slow, and a little melancholy, like a forgotten lullaby. Each note was perfectly distinct, without the scrapes or hesitations a damaged mechanism would produce. The repaired steel tooth did its job, playing its low note at the right time, completing the harmony. The gaze turned to the mechanism, now visible through the clean glass. The brass cylinder rotated at a steady, smooth pace. Its tiny pins, gleaming under the light, moved toward the steel comb. Each time a pin met a tooth, it would pluck it and release it, producing a note. It was a mesmerizing mechanical dance, a choreography of precision crafted long ago. To see the movement and hear the sound at the same time was like understanding the soul of the little machine. It was the translation of physical movement into auditory emotion.
The melody continued, repeating its cycle a few times. The sound filled the space without being intrusive. It was a gentle, sonic presence, one that invited contemplation. The mind emptied of other thoughts, focusing only on the sequence of notes as they unfolded. It was a sound that seemed to belong to that night, to that quiet room, to the scent of wax and clean wood. It was the reward for hours of patient, careful work. The imbalance of silence had been replaced by the order of music. As the spring began to lose its tension, the music grew a little slower, the notes spacing out a bit more, as if the box were yawning before returning to sleep. Finally, the last note sounded and dissolved into the air, and the silence returned. But it was a different silence than before. It was not a silence of neglect, but a silence of repose, the space between songs. The lid was closed gently, and the mechanism stopped. The box was lifted from the table. Its weight felt the same, but its essence had changed. It was no longer a forgotten object, but a restored instrument. It was carried back to the bookcase, but not to the topmost shelf. It was placed on a shelf at eye level, a place of prominence, where it could be easily seen and reached. There, among the books, its polished wood stood out. The task was complete. The promise was fulfilled. The evening, which had begun with a small piece of disarray, now ended with a small piece of restored harmony. The music box rested in its new place on the shelf. The lamplight reached its side, highlighting the soft gleam of the waxed wood. The room was quiet again, but the echo of the simple melody seemed to linger in the air, a pleasant, recent memory. The small workspace on the coffee table was clean. The cloths had been put away. The tools were in their cases. Only the faint scent of beeswax remained. A gaze swept across the room. The armchair, the rug, the books on the shelves. Everything was in its proper place, peaceful under the warm light. Outside, the sleeping city was silent. The rain had washed the air clean, and through the window, the distant lights seemed sharper and brighter against the dark sky. A puddle on the windowsill reflected the lamplight, shimmering softly. A step was taken toward the window. A hand touched the cool glass. Breath fogged the surface for a moment before vanishing. Watching the night outside, the quiet of the wet streets brought a feeling of deep calm. The evening's small project was over. A small broken thing had been mended. A small disharmony had been tuned. The lamp was switched off. The room sank into shadow, lit only by the faint light coming through the window. The shapes of the furniture became soft silhouettes. The music box was now just a dark rectangle on the shelf, but its presence was felt differently. It was a presence of potential, of music in waiting. The path to the bedroom was taken in the dark, feet knowing the way. The house breathed in a slow, quiet rhythm. The night had completed its cycle. The rain had come and gone. The work had begun and ended. The silence was broken and then returned, but in a more complete form. There was nothing left to be done. All that was left was to rest, to listen to the quiet.